Welcome to the Venus Rising Spotlight interview with Sharon Weizenbaum. Sharon, I'm really happy to have you as the guest today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So we're going to do a brief rundown of Sharon's bio, so you know straight up what she's been working on and what she's offering, and then we'll get into the interview. So Sharon graduated from the New England School of Acupuncture in 1983, and she studied many times in China with a focus on gynecology, obstetrics, and in the last 15 years, more of a focus on the classics of East Asian medicine. Sharon teaches internationally, she publishes articles, and she translates a lot of her own course material. And she's translated around 20 ebooks. Sharon is the director of the White Pine Institute and the White Pine Circle, which both focus on in-depth education in East Asian medicine. Sharon is the instructor of the White Pine Graduate Mentorship Program, which is a 2-year comprehensive training in classical East Asian medicine. And we're going to go into some details about that course later on, as well as the White Pine Circle and some other things. So let's start at the beginning. I noticed that you graduated from acupuncture in 1983, which means that you would have been one of the first wave of American people to study acupuncture and be interested in it early on. What inspired you to get into acupuncture?
Well, I was in my early 20s, so I was quite young when I even heard that it was possible to study acupuncture. And I was, sort of a young hippie. I grew up spending a tremendous amount of time in the woods in New England and with horses and animals, and felt a very strong connection to nature. And then I went to an herbal weekend where I met Arya Nielsen, who is still a teacher in East Asian medicine. And she had just finished studying at the New England School of Acupuncture, and she gave a workshop on acupuncture and Chinese medicine that I went to. We were sitting like around a campfire in the woods, and she was talking about it to a small group of us. And I remember she just said, in Chinese medicine, if something is cold, you can figure out that it's cold and then you just warm it up. And if something is hot, you can see the signs that it's hot and you cool it down. And if there's not enough, you build it up. And if there's too much, you help disperse it. And I was just really struck with the simplicity of that, just the idea that I could be a doctor and I could work with the natural elements, hot and cold, too much, not enough, just in a very simple way with really simple tools. So it really inspired me. And I think also there was something about Arya at the time where, she lived in the Catskills and she had a little cabin and she was able to offer acupuncture to her community. And I think I was very attracted to the lifestyle. Like, wow, I could live in a community and have a way to work that contributed to my community that was also congruent with some of my deepest values about kind of being connected to nature. And I didn't really have a strong idea of what I was getting into, how it would sort of like take over my life, just in a very positive way, in a very exciting way, that I had no idea of the depth of the medicine, it just sort of resonated with something. And it was just a yes. And so I was in school in the next class at the New England School of Acupuncture. And that was 40 years ago that I started studying. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that experience of finding the simple natural logic of Chinese medicine, and in a way it demystifies how medicine can work and how it can be a science as well as something natural or intuitive and logical all at the same time, when a lot of us in the West have grown up with the science of Western medicine being this highly complex, mystified thing without being mystical or natural so much.
Right.
Yeah, so it's definitely, and then you have no idea, of course, once you get into it, just how complex and detailed Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine can be.
Right.
But it can start off and it can remain very simple the whole way throughout the confusion of studying. I remember when I first studied, they said, by the end of first year, you're going to feel like you got this. I understand this is cool. Some of it's kind of kooky or magical or whatever your relationship is with things like systemic concordances. But then by third year, don't worry, you'll be immensely confused and the whole thing will be super complex. And then when you emerge after fourth or fifth year, depending on what kind of a program you do, you might be ready to practice. You might be ready to say, okay, I can categorize and organize all of this information into something that's clinically applicable and help people. Yeah. And of course, then we spend the next 80 years studying more.
Yes.
Because we live long lives with our wisdom.
Well, I think a lot, my path has been really realizing the limitations of my education, that once you get out and you try to start working with people, you don't really have the tools to work with it. And I think for me, there was always sort of a drive, like, this isn't working the way they said it would work in school, and so what's the problem? And I always felt like the problem was not with me, that I wasn't good at it or something, but that there was some kind of confusion about how I was understanding it, and but that it wasn't a problem with the medicine itself, that it was more that the way I was understanding or the way I'd been taught the medicine wasn't clear. And so that really drove me to go deeper, so that I could get to something that actually makes clinical sense and really is functional in the clinic.
Right.
So, that's been the path and has really developed into the graduate mentorship program, that all the things that, like that, they said that would work, but it just doesn't. And then why doesn't that work? And then figuring that out and then being able to pass that on, all the things that I'd figured out over all these years.
Yeah, I think that's also a really shared journey for a lot of us. And that leads me into, the next question is, so as your career developed, obviously that was a part of what inspired you to develop in your areas of expertise and what it is you're now offering as a teacher. And so you have developed into classical East Asian medicine and the Shanghai Lun and cold school, we could call it. And also you've translated quite a lot of the work yourself. So will you talk a little bit about doing that work and what drove you to go deeper into that part of East Asian medicine, because it's such a broad field?
Yeah. Well, I think it was partly that I felt very strong limitations with TCM, and so then I really heard about Dr. Hong and started studying with Dr. Hong. We had him come to White Pine Institute several times, and then I went to Nanjing to study with him as well. And started seeing the classical formula, like the architecture of the formulas are working in a really different way than TCM is working. And just wanted to pursue that and understand what is it about these formulas and the formulas themselves, but also the principles that the formulas express are quite different than the principles of TCM. So that I really started exploring that more and more and more, and actually was finally very influenced by Liu Lihong, who wrote the book. Let's see, I think I have it right here. Classical Chinese Medicine, this book. And it was long before this book came out, because this is very recently published in English, and in Chinese it's called Si Kao Zhong Yi. Kind of contemplating Chinese medicine is the how you translate the Chinese title, but where there was a certain shift where I saw the circular dynamics of the universe expressed in the structure of the Shanghanlun, and that really changed everything. Like all the formulas sort of just fell into place as working with these circular dynamics in the universe, but also how those dynamics work in our bodies. And a lot of pieces just fell into place in a very beautiful way, where the medicine started to feel very connected to me, where it felt like I know how to do things, this for this and that for that, but it didn't have a unifying principle until I sort of came in contact with Liu Lihong's work. And then all the other teachers like Dr. Huang Huang or Feng Shilun, who I've studied with, Fu Yanling, all just incredible teachers. But the way they taught sort of sat with me in a new way once I understood the circular dynamics. So, you know, a lot of classic, there are lots of ways to practice and study and teach classical formulas. But for me, it's really the classical principles, which are the circular dynamics, and then making sense of the formulas within those principles. So, you know, different people will say I practice with classic formulas, or I practice classical Chinese medicine, but it can mean very different things to different people. So that's what it means for me. And it also really connected me to the Huangdi Neijing. And once I understood the circular dynamics of the universe and how that works in our own bodies, then I could read the Huangdi Neijing in a very different way and see how that text relates to the Shanghan Zabing, which is just, I can't even tell you how beautiful it is. It's such a beautiful expression of the medicine. You know, it's, yeah, and very clinically applicable as well.
I'm thinking of a thread on one of the practitioner forum groups that I saw recently, and someone was asking, is it worth studying Shanghanlun? I'm thinking about it. Why would I? And, you know, it really is just one, I've seen this discussion 100 times as well in the past. And I know that everyone who has studied, and for those who don't know, it's the treatise on cold damage or cold-induced disease. So it's what I referred to earlier as a cold school. Everyone who has studied this system more closely has found that it has answered a lot of those questions about how do I get everything I've learned to raise into a more reliable, clinically applicable system, that I have more expertise over the kind of results I'm going to get and the kind of diagnosis I need to use, and to hone in faster on what medicine is needed in this particular situation.
Right.
And you know, some people who focus on or do extra study on the Shanghanlun end up feeling quite exclusive about it, and that it, you know, it basically does everything I need to do in clinic, and that's pretty much the main system I practice with, and other people would use it most of the time, but not necessarily all of the time. And I'm just curious, how is that for you? How does that work for you?
Well, the principles of the Shanghanlun are universal principles about the way that life works and the way that the body works. So 100% of the time, I'm using the Shanghanlun principles, because they're just that's how things work. So once you shift and you're working with those principles, it's just how things are. So you would never veer from that because it's comprehensive. So I think that the principles are completely comprehensive, and and then like the body doesn't actually care about exactly which herbs you use, and the herbs don't care, but you can apply the principles and use a variety of herbs to apply the same principles. So I don't think, for me, I don't have to be exclusive to only the formulas in exactly the same doses that Zhang Zhongjing recommended them. In fact, I think that Zhang Zhongjing himself, you could see the text as a text of how to modify formulas, because there are so many formulas like Guizhi Tong, but if it's more like this, then you add more Guizhi, and that's Guizhi Jia Gui Tong, and if it's more like this, you take away the Guizhi, or you double the Bai Shao, or you add Gugan, and it's sort of a text on how to adjust formulas to fit the exact person in front of you. So I don't really agree that the formula shouldn't be modified, because I think in a way that's what Zhang Zhongjing is actually trying to teach us. And I think the idea of the damage from cold, when I learned it, it was sort of like there's the Shanghanlun, which is about damage from cold, and then there's the Wenbing school, which is about damage from heat, and as if they were like a yin-yang pair. And it's so not like that, that, first the Wenbing came, so many hundreds of years later from the Shanghanlun. And if you think of the name of the treatise on damage from cold, what it really is about that the life force itself is warm. And because we know that, because when you're dead, you're cold. So we know that the life force is warm. And so really the treatise on damage from cold is really about anything that gets in the way of the warmth of the life force. So it's not about cold evils from the outside. It's about anything that upsets the circulation and storage of our life force. So it's comprehensive text on how to treat the whole body for anything. I mean, I think that it's likely that the formulas in the Shanghanlun won't treat everything, but the principles of the Shanghanlun will help everything. The principles to me are what's so important about the text. And really the Wenbing, it was never actually meant to be a school. It sort of turned into a school. And even the Shanghanlun as a school, I don't like that, because it's like, oh, there's the spleen and stomach school and the warm disease school. And I think that really the Wenbing ideas are an extension of the Shanghanlun principles and how to apply those principles in an even broader way. And I know like Li Dongyuan and the Piwei Lun and the what's called the spleen stomach school, as if it's like a different school. But really, Li Dongyuan also was very steeped in the Shanghan Zabing Lun, and his was like an expression of those principles. You can see his work as an expression and an articulation of those principles and an expansion on them. But he didn't actually leave those classical roots. Yeah.
I'm glad you took the bait there on that question because I have not studied as much of this, well, certainly not as much as you, but I haven't studied as much of this as I would even have liked to. But from what I have delved into, and I was lucky in that a lot of Shanghanlun was covered in the degree course that I did in Australia. And I think it was really just because of who the teachers were at the time, and that I had teachers who wanted to make sure we got a whole year of this. So I had no idea, of course, in comparing courses from Australia and America, there's just such a huge diversity in what it is that we have all studied. And I had no idea at the time just how important and foundational that particular chunk of the degree was. And also, it was like having a box of 1,000 jigsaw pieces, which had just begun to be put together for me. But then, when it comes to what I would want to deepen my knowledge of later, the rest of the pieces in that box, which I still haven't laid out, are, they just really fall into place, like you're saying, quite easily, and become endlessly relevant, and I think of, as you were saying, it's not really the cold school or about external cold pathogens. It's about the fact that anything that isn't warm is kind of not supportive of the life force being at its optimum. And I think of it as a fluid template for formula construction. Like you were saying, you can adapt once you understand what the recipe is for the recipe, then you can adapt and flow with the recipe, which is designed to move with the patient's whole being, which is not going to stand still and shouldn't be standing still, especially if you're doing medicine right. So we're talking about movement as warmth there as well, and positive progression.
And also there's, I think, kind of two aspects, and one is making sure that the life force is moving constantly. But the other is that we store it well, because there's that yin yang aspect, like we receive the life force and we have to be able to store it. So, deficiency syndromes are always where we're failing to store properly. And excess is where the movement is getting blocked. So there's both the movement of the life force as well as the storage of it. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, these days that's just so relevant in terms of people being able to correctly digest and absorb nutrients, because there's so much in the way of that. Just one example. So you have done a lot of translating work. You mentioned 20 or so ebooks. Would you like to mention any of them here?
Yeah, the ebooks that I've translated, it's probably, I don't know, well over 2,000 pages of material that I've translated, a lot in gynecology, obstetrics, and a lot in the fire gut school, and also a lot in classical formulas. And I love translating case studies, and also discussions that doctors have about particular formulas, how they think about them and look at them, is very interesting to me. And so I have lots of ebooks. Some of them are about, something like bleeding disorders in women or vaginal discharge, but others are, like I just finished one on Gugun formulas, like formulas in which Gugun is a very important ingredient. And so lots of case studies on these formulas and discussions by doctors. And these ebooks are given to my students in my graduate mentorship program, because we go through we learn the formulas through formula families. And so as we're learning, the Guizhitong formula family, they'll get ebooks with all these different formulas so they can do supplemental reading, and you can learn so much by reading the ways that doctors use these formulas and all the different ways a formula can be used and different things it can be used for. And also the ebooks go into the White Pine Circle. There are resources for White Pine Circle members, but I haven't published any of them like for sale or anything like that. I haven't turned them into books yet. I have that plan to turn them into books because I think, you know, they're just so incredibly useful as a way to really in-depth learn about a formula. Like, for example, just like Gui Zhi, I probably have like 25 different cases on the use of Gui Zhi, and there's so many things like diarrhea, morning sickness, constipation, and, you know, all kinds of different main complaints that are all treated with Gui Zhi. And so you can see how in each of the cases, what is it that makes it a Gui Zhi pattern, even though the main complaint is always different, you know? So you learn by reading these different cases, all of them for different main complaints, you start to be able to recognize what's the same about them all that made Gui Zhi work, even for things like one case is diarrhea, another case is constipation. So how can this Gui Zhi pattern give rise to diarrhea? How could it give rise also to constipation? You know, so it trains us to look not at the disease, like how do you treat constipation, but how to look for the pattern that helps explain why the person is constipated. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's one of the beauties of having a whole range of main complaints under, you know, one particular formula. So
I mean,
so,
it's
yeah.
it's my favorite thing about this medicine is that we're dealing with patterns. So, you know, the saying that we're treating the person, not the symptom, is forever
That's
true.
right.
And that was made very obvious to me in the way that I studied, but then sometimes I see the way other people are practicing who've done different kinds of courses, and I think, did they not learn that part? Or, you know, I don't really know, or maybe it's just the way that my mind works. I'm very into correlations of things.
Right.
And I make herbal medicines and I use astrology when I'm making them, and I'm lining up, you know, I'm lining up myself with the plants, with the universe, with the time, with everything that I could, that's present, because it's present. So it's going to be part of it. And, you know, I think that it's also one of our biggest challenges as practitioners in the West with communicating the potential of the medicine as well, or if we want to take that on. Some have found ways to practice without having to do so. And I think, you know, it's just that the beauty of understanding that you were talking about the circular dynamics and the pattern dynamics. And so there are so many ways to resolve those dynamics and get a harmonious, optimal circular flow, again, which is that life force, that movement, not being excess, not being deficient, not being cold and dead, but being warm and alive and moving and in harmony. And so,
and being in alignment with the movement of nature.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nature works for your body. You know, really, from the perspective that I come from, it's really about like aligning, looking at diagnosis and seeing how you're not quite aligned with the circular dynamics. And when you're aligned, it's actually the circular dynamics that do the healing. So it's a very different perspective from me having to do the healing to actually nature does the healing, and all I'm doing is lining you up with nature, seeing how you're not quite lined up and helping get that right. And to me, I think that was the view of Zhang Zhongjing. I think that's how he looked at the body. I can't prove that, but if you look at it that way, the formulas make so much more sense. Yeah.
And we can be adaptable as well, because we understand, well, this is happening. This is the interruption in the circular flow, and it's winter. And this person is at this stage of their life. They're this age, they're this kind of person, or they're this gender. And so you can then find that a different medicine will restore that flow for them compared to another person.
That's right.
Or in another
That's
circumstance, right. Or with a different symptom.
I think that that it's very difficult for all of us really to, that it's partly our Western training to want to sort of treat the symptom or the disease. Like, how do I treat diabetes? How do I treat headaches? How do I treat constipation? And to quiet that and say, I don't treat any of those. I treat the pattern. I need to look at the pattern and to not be sort of led astray by all those diseases and complaints. And often it's our patients also, and they come in with headaches or reflux and, all what they're suffering from. And so it's sometimes it's a real meditation to say, like, okay, I understand you have headaches. I want to see the pattern that explains why you have headaches and treat that. That we're often pulled in by our patient suffering to think, like, how do I treat headaches? That's what they're suffering from. And it takes a certain kind of, stability in your thinking to be able to see that suffering and then say, but that's not what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on the pattern, and I can trust that if I treat the pattern, the headaches will get better. It's very, it's anxiety provoking, I think, for practitioners when people are suffering from something, and it makes us want to treat what they're suffering from, and we can get pulled astray by that really easily. So it's part of what I work with my students is, like, how do we create that stability in the way that we view the body, and we do understand you're suffering from a headache, and that's important to me, but I still have to step back from that to be able to see the pattern.
Yeah, I think that certainly speaks to finding that higher level of clinical applicability as well, because if you do treat the symptoms from your mindset, thinking about it that way, and you haven't hit the jackpot and resolved the pattern whilst you do that, then you can end up with a patient who just keeps coming back with new symptoms. And then you're chasing that, and you're like, well, I'm kind of helping them. They got better because they don't have headaches anymore. They just have other problems now. So I think a large part of overcoming that maybe practitioner-patient dynamic expectation to focus on the symptom is to understand that you are helping them faster in the long run by really resolving the pattern.
Right. And it's even in the short run, I think. When you really treat the pattern, it's better in the short run too. I think it's more effective altogether and in a more comprehensive way. Yeah.
So you have the graduate mentorship program, which is 2 years and comprehensive. And you also run the White Pine Circle, which I joined and want to get into more deeply. I joined recently, and I've seen a couple of the ebooks there. So I'm excited now to chase up as many of those as I can find in the circle. And can you just tell us a little bit about the difference between the graduate mentorship program and the White Pine Circle, and what people would receive if they sign up for either?
Yeah, so I just started a new graduate mentorship program. We've had our first 3 classes. It's a whole 2-year program, so we've just begun, and that I work with students in a really close way, really just taking them through the whole frame of reference, and then also really learning how to do an intake and what do you do with the information that you gather in the intake. How do you actually organize it? Because what I realized over years of teaching is that people's ways of diagnosing were all over the place, and that really no one learned how to diagnose. That what we learned was ask all these questions and get all this information, you know, feel the pulses, look at the tongue, get all this information, and then what do? You come to a diagnosis. And what that actually means is not explained. How do you work with all of that information? What do you do with it? It's sort of like, then you just look at all the information and you come to a diagnosis, you know, and that it's like amazing. Ding, you got a diagnosis, like as if it's like, it's just going to fall into place. And I saw, wow, it's not falling into, like, people are all over the place. There's so much, like, what do you do with all this information so you can actually come to a diagnosis that you feel like, yes, I get it, I see what's going on, and you can know that that is accurate and feel confident then in, this is now what I need to do, you know. And because you can have a diagnosis that you can make a case for, and it can be completely wrong, you know. And so, you know, that happens a lot. So people are lost and doing all kinds of different things with this information. So that's something I've been studying for probably 20 years, is like, what do you do with that information? How can you work with it? And what information is important? And so that is a big part of the graduate mentorship program, is really understanding what to do with signs and symptoms. And a lot of that is like really looking at each sign and symptom for what it tells you for sure, and not jumping to a conclusion about what you think it means. You know, so a lot of times, like, somebody has loose stool and you say, oh, spleen deficiency, you know, and so you're already on a track, and then you start gathering evidence for something you've already decided, and it might be actually quite incorrect, you know, that the loose stool could be from a whole variety of possibilities. And so, you know, how do you stay with what you know for sure? And what I've discovered over time is that that when you stay with what you know for sure about something, like loose stool, oh, the stool is not formed, that's all I know, and you don't jump to any conclusion and you hold off, that the diagnosis, so you're actually looking at what's actually there instead of your thoughts about what this means, that the diagnosis will actually reveal itself to you. So we practice that in the graduate mentorship program, you know, how to look at symptoms. You know, like I have a saying that symptoms are not always what they seem, but they are always what they are. And so being able to see them for what they are, and we practice it a lot with different cases, and students do cases, you know, really letting the diagnosis reveal itself to us in its actuality, as opposed to all of our theories about things, because we learn so many theories. So a large part of the program is learning how to do an intake, what questions are important and why, and then how do we not jump to conclusions, and then be able to see what is actually there, and then apply our yin yang and Shang Hanlun theory onto what's actually there, and be able to see what in the circle needs to be speeded up and what needs to be slowed down. And the formulas are all about moving things, which means like speeding things up, and so helping to store things, which is like slowing things down. So that's what that program is. And now I've taught it. I think now I'm teaching it. It's the 9th time I've taught it, and I'm not sure how many more times I'll teach it. And maybe even I'm not sure if this will be the last time that I'm teaching it. Because I really, like, I'm almost 65, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm still as in love with Chinese medicine as ever. But I think as we get older, like I'm thinking about my legacy, what I want to write, what I've been working with. I love it and I believe in it. And I think the White Pine Circle has come out of that. And that's really, like, I know a lot of people, I have a lot of connections, and I have a reputation I've developed. So what can I do with that, to kind of create a legacy? I have a lot of students who are now starting to teach. And so the White Pine Circle is a platform for my students to start really teaching what they've been learning and experiencing in their practices. And it's like, you can't imagine how much joy it brings me that they are finding their wings and starting to teach courses. And so, I feel like I want to create this place where what I've been working on for all these years can start to almost like seeds coming out, taking their own roots, and people starting to be able to do great things from it. And so yeah, it's a platform where it's a membership organization, the White Pine Circle, where when you become a member, you get to come to all kinds of lectures, and there's ebooks and all kinds of resources that change every month. So when you're a member, you can go to all these things for free. And you can also apply to offer your own lectures in the White Pine Circle. If you want to teach a course, like, we want the White Pine Circle to kind of be supported by the membership, and the members to feel like it's this rich environment where they can learn. And also there's all kinds of forums where people can get practice support, and we're going through all the lines of the Shanghanmun and Jingui one by one and having discussions. And we have a book group now where we're reading classical Chinese medicine, and we'll have a book group every season. So there's a lot of community and education, but also we offer a platform for teachers to teach classes. And we're pretty much supported by the membership so that we can support teachers to make a living, a really good living off of their courses. So we've set it up that the White Pine Circle doesn't make anything from the courses that are offered, that were supported by the membership. So we've now run a bunch of courses. Toby Daly taught a course in some acupuncture, and there's a Fukushin course coming up with Kimiko Shire, and the teachers are very well supported with the White Pine Circle. So we want to really have it be a place where people can make a living and shine. So that's kind of the idea. And I feel like it all has to do with my legacy. Like, I have these connections and this reputation. What am I going to do with it? It's like equity or something, like, I want to do something good with it. And so this, the pandemic really helped, because all of a sudden it was like, wow, that the way that Zoom sort of blossomed as a greater possibility. And so yeah, it's really fun. The White Pine Circle is really fun. And my vision is to sort of be able to step away from it and ultimately die, and that it has like some life of its own, and that, that I'm leaving some kind of positive legacy that can go on without me. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm so glad to hear that. So it's not just that people can come and study with you, but practitioners can go and join the circle and they can develop, and then they can also become teachers within under the umbrella that you've created and
Yeah.
with
Or
the
if you're already a
dynamics of
teacher,
the circle.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people, that are already teachers, and they are like, I have this thing I want to teach. Like yesterday, Karen Sela from Israel gave a lecture on she analyzed the whole case of dysmenorrhea with terrible PMS, and she's already a teacher in Israel, and this gave her a chance to talk about something that's very exciting for her, and then to also have our community get to know who she is. So it really provides a platform for various teachers to be able to show what they do. Kind of like what you're doing in a way, doing these spotlight interviews, to be able to like share the richness of our tradition. So
And also,
that's really, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's also really nice to get to know a bit about the person or the teacher or the expert, because we have a lot of access to the work that people have done. But to really, with like you said, with Zoom and more ease with international communications and collaborations and interdisciplinary networking of the actual knowledge, I think it really progresses what we know. And what actually is the glue that holds all that together and makes all that happen is people knowing each other with a bit more of a personal touch.
Yes, yes.
So that's what, that maybe that feeling or that heart connection, or being so inspired by someone's story and journey as well as their work might be what really inspires the next collaboration or interdisciplinary exploration of what can be uncovered.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Well, that's all really exciting. I'm far more excited about being a member of White Pine Circle, but I was already very excited about it. But just knowing how busy I've been and how much I haven't really had the time to delve into what I've signed up for yet, now I'm definitely going to, I know I'm going to allocate more time to have a look and get involved. So where do people find you? Oh, well, one more thing. With the graduate mentorship program, are you setting that up so that other people will teach it if you step away, so that it too will live on?
Um, no, I haven't really thought about anybody teaching that. Um, I, yeah, I mean, there's lots of students teaching in in their own way. Sort of one of my thoughts is I really want, you know, like we take life in and it turns into ourselves and then we get to express ourselves. I want the teachings to come into my students and really for them to make it their own and then see what do they do with it, what do they want to create with it. So not so much making like a cookie cutter, like a new graduate mentorship program without Sharon, because I feel like the graduate mentorship program is really my expression. And I think it really has to do with me. Like no one else could really teach it because it's my expression. But the principles, and I would like other people to do their expression. How does it resonate with you? How does it make sense with you? How would you organize it? How would you pass it on to others? And so, I have students that are really in the process of making that their own and doing then what they want to do with it. So it's not like a franchise, like I know some teachers have franchises, like you teach what I teach and you're part, but it's part of my overall, and that's so not what I want. You know, I want to let people go, and it has nothing to do with me anymore. Like, I do me and you do you. Um, and I see that my students are doing that, and it's very exciting because everybody has different influences and temperaments, and you know, so how do you make it? What do you do with it? What resonates? What transforms in you so that you have your expression?
That's
Um,
great. That certainly removes a lot of the compromise that can degrade knowledge over time. And as we know, East Asian medicine is extremely persistent in fulfilling its own legacy over time through different
that's a beautiful way to
human
say
beings.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nature is speaking through all these different human beings who express, develop, foster that legacy in with their unique spark, and that is really what the Qi is about, right? The Qi and the Shen. So
yeah,
yeah, I understand that. That's great. So
yeah,
where
yeah. But there are people in the program who are farmers, and there are people who are, you know, yoga practitioners, you know, and I'm not a yoga practitioner, but they're doing really interesting things like integrating it with what has influenced them. People who are, you know, Catholics and seeing it through a lens that's, you know, really different than mine. So, yeah.
so where do people go? What are the websites?
There's whitepinehealingarts.org is sort of the clinic website, and you can get to the Institute and the graduate mentorship program. You can get to everything from there, but there's also whitepinecircle.org um, and whitepineinstitute.org. Yeah,
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah.
that's where you go. So we've got whitepinehealingarts.org, whitepinecircle.org, and whitepineinstitute.org.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, it's been really exciting to talk to you today.
Yeah.
And
Thank you
thank you
so
so
much for
much.
having me.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you so much for sitting under the Venus Rising spotlight. And I hope a lot of people come to find you. And if people are interested in creating any spin-off talks with Sharon on any particular topics, like if you run a podcast or if you do clubhouse talks or any other thing, get in touch and let those seeds sprout.
Yeah, and I would say if anybody has ideas of something that they would like to teach, that the White Pine Circle is a really good platform where there's a very rapt audience for you. So
Great. Okay, well, this has been fun. Thank you so
thank
much,
you.
and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
All right, bye.